Okay, cool. Awesome. Hey, thanks guys for coming along. So I'm going to take you through how to build world-class dashboards and reporting. We're going to look at, I guess, the best practice data viz development techniques that you will be able to take away and implement in your organization to hopefully make an impact immediately. We've got the Q&A set up, so please feel free to chuck questions in the Q&A as we go. I'll try to answer questions as we go, but if I don't, if I miss anything, then we'll definitely loop back at the end. We will have time to answer any questions you have. Right, let me just get that working. Okay, cool. So a little bit about me first. Managing Director at Flock Consulting. I've had about 14 years in business intelligence, and most of that I've really specialised in data visualization design and deployment of business intelligence into organisations. So that's how we get data visualizations consumed and the uptake, increasing the uptake with the end users. So Flock Consulting, we're a business intelligence consultancy. We basically help customers, help our clients move from data to actionable insight. So a little bit of setting the scene. So business intelligence, I'll let you read that in your own time if you like, but essentially business intelligence is the process of taking data from a source system and turning it into an actionable insight. There's a bunch of tools we use to do this, things like SQL for storing and handling data, Power BI for building and deploying data visualization reports. And then we're also starting to work now and building some of these deployment options into web technologies. And sort of deploying them via web or even integrated into software. So data visualization, which I guess is a lot of what we're talking about today, is essentially a graphical representation of data that helps an end user to consume information much faster and more efficiently. Some of the tools that we use these days, Microsoft Power BI, Tableau, ClickSense, would be used a little bit more for the data science side of things. It's obviously a lot more capable at the back end. And then we've seen libraries such as D3. There's a bunch of libraries out there for web technologies that are used for visualizing data. So the three common types of visualizations we might see these days is an infographic, which just popped up on the screen. So the infographic is something that's has a specific use case. It's probably an individual use case. It's typically a lot more design, graphical, but more imagery involved, and it would cover off a story, one individual story, and show a bunch of information. An infometric, which we've seen a lot of these days around the coronavirus. In the COVID-19, sort of an individual chart that shows us information on one specific thing. And then when we get into data analysis and reporting, so it's this scenario where we're actually not just having one piece of information, we've got multiple pieces of information, and we've got the ability to ask questions and filter and dig into the data. So that's what we're going to look at today. Really, is the data visualization design side of designing for data analysis and reporting. So typically, it's developed for a business or an organisation on a specific topic. So a defined requirement. You've typically got your specific audience that you're aiming it towards, whether it's internal or external. You're working with data sets that you know, and you typically, obviously, internally have an internal team or individual that's designated to develop the visualization report. So that's what one might look like. So the actionable insight. So setting the scene here. A lot of reports we see these days have a lot of numbers, but don't necessarily have a number that you want to be able to, or you could do something with. So an actionable insight really is something that it's information that can be acted upon. It's that thing that you can actually go and make changes in your organization because you know something that you can act upon. I like to think of it like baking a cake. You don't typically walk into a kitchen and go, oh yeah, I'm going to bake a cake, and then that's what I'm going to focus on. Like, what can I do to bake a cake? we'll identify what the cake is what the outcome we want, chocolate cake, sponge cake, whatever the case may be. And then we set about the tasks that are measurable. And so things like measuring flour, measuring sugar, measuring cocoa, turning on the oven to a specific temperature, measuring the time that you bake the cake for, the time that you cool the cake for. So if you focus intently on each of those individual actions, the baking of the cake itself, all those individual items that you measure or can measure will actually just allow the cake to happen. So the focus there is the actionable insights, is all of those little things that make up the whole. So once we set about and we've said, all right, we want to start delivering a project, then how do we go about that? So obviously, working with our stakeholders within the business, we want to be able to identify what the requirements are. And so typically, what I like to use is user stories. What I've seen over the years is, and it's probably quite obvious, is that people in the business, our stakeholders, typically don't understand very well what data visualization is or what it can achieve. And so the problem we see is that defining requirements for a technical person can get lost. And because they can't define, I want this sort of chart, or I want that sort of chart, or I want these KPIs. What they can do is describe in words what they want to do. And so to allow them the ability just to use their own language is where user stories comes in. So it's based on their needs, and it's based on how they can articulate what they want. So 3 examples here. What is my gross profit for a selected year and region? How are my units trending for various towns in my region? Which categories are performing best or worst? So these are informal sentences that they can describe what they want to be able to see and what they need to be able to understand. And then as developers, we can take those away and we can turn those into data. So in this case here, what we'll do is we'll take those 3 and we'll pass out the measures and dimensions that come from the data sets that we're going to use. So in this case, we can see here highlighted, what is my gross profit? So gross profit gives us an indication, year and region. That tells us that we need a calendar. That tells us we need to know locations. How are my units trending? So units is obviously the obvious thing that we know, how many units are being sold or moved or whatever. But the trending is also an indicator for us that they want to know over time. Various cities in my region, so it expands on the region and location. Which categories are performing best or worst by total sales? So we can see there that we've got categories, we've got total sales, but we've also got best and worst. So we might have bottom 10, top 10, or something like that. So once we piece these data requirements together and put them into a larger sort of concept of what we're dealing with a data perspective, that's when we'll move and we'll look at what does that look like from a data model. So I'm not going to dig into the data model side of things today, but obviously a typical data model we see there in the star diagram is, our transaction table sitting in the middle and our dim tables around the outside. Once we've done this and we've set up our data model, we've got our data, we know what information we want, we've got our user stories, we know what the end user wants. Then typically what I say is engage early and iterate often. This is something I tell everyone that I work with, whether they're in the team, in the flock team, or whether they're in a development team within a customer, is to engage early and iterate often. So a couple of things there, like once you've got your data set up first and you want to go out there and start building stuff, I say, spend 3 days to a week just throwing stuff at the data visualization tool, whatever you use, and produce stuff based around their user stories, and then take it back to them as soon as possible. And what you'll find is that if you do that within a week, you've got a bunch of visualizations, you've got a bunch of reports that you're sort of putting together based on the user stories. They'll then get it. They'll then start to understand what it means to actually visualize data, and then you'll find those sorts of questions around, if we can do that, can we do this? Or what about doing this? Or could we change this? Much better to be doing that after the first week than after 6 weeks of development. You get that early feedback, so you as a developer is not spending a lot of time, doing the wrong thing, I guess, essentially, or doing things that they don't understand. There again, I said iterate often. And then the last thing, which I think is really, really important, is that you create promoters. So if you include a stakeholder in the process early on and consistently, so if you're meeting with them every week and showing them how things are developing and they're getting the opportunity to give you feedback, then they become promoters for you in the organization. So they're the ones who actually go out to their team and say, hey, this report's fantastic, we should be using it, I helped develop it. So really important. So that process, you know, it can look like this. As an analyst, you sit there and you get a request from a stakeholder, you do your user story development and then scope that for the development with the data. You go through that process of design, UAT and review, going back to your requester, and then of course once you get to the end, you're more likely to have something that is exactly what they want, and deploy and train out to end users. So when we get to the development side of things, you know, what should that look like? We work a lot with our customers around developing a design standards process. So that's keeping each and every single report formatted and developed in the same way. But to do that, you need a framework and a structure. And so we work with what's called the MAD framework. So the MAD framework works at the top from monitor, analyze, detail. Monitor is your high level stuff. So this is an overview view of everything. Analyze, you go down a level, and then detail. So let's have a closer look. So essentially the monitor section is your dashboard. So the definition of dashboard, sometimes a bit contentious, but a dashboard should really just be one page. A dashboard is not multiple pages. A report is multiple pages, but a dashboard is one page. You know, think of it like the dashboard in your car. So a dashboard has all the key pieces of information that help you maintain the running of your car or your business or organization. So it's very much, we don't have multiple dashboards in our car, we just have one, and that's got all the key information we need to make sure that we're running our car correctly. If something happens in our car and we need to be alerted by it, then we get a light. You know, something shows up orange, something shows up red. And it's the same thing for us in an organization. Our dashboard is really that high level bit of information that when something happens and something's not quite right, then we need to go down and look at things a little bit more detail. Here's a typical example of an executive dashboard. So there's lots of high level bits of information, but easy to identify issues. So for example, you know, where lines are trending down, we've got that ability to see that there, but we can't necessarily do the analysis at this point, but this is where we go to the next phase. So once we may have identified something on a dashboard, then we want to dig a little deeper. And so an analysis page is very much based around a specific part of the business. So it could be products, it could be employees, it could be countries, it could be production. So it's very much the ability to go into that next level on a specific topic. And in this case, they typically have less KPIs and probably more charts. So it may look something like this. So this is an example from the training that we do. So in this case here, we're just looking at countries. So we can identify information based on specific countries, and we can dig in and we can look at more information here. So we're not looking at products, we're not looking at anything else, we're just looking at what's happening based on a country. And then if we start to identify further things that are interesting, that we need to really get down to the finer detail, that's where we get to our third level, which is our detail page. So when you're building something like this into a report, you know, depending on the tool that you've got, you'll see these monitor pages. There might be one or two, and then you might have, you might have up to 5 or 10 analyze pages, and then at the end you might have, you know, 1 or 2 detail pages. And the detail pages essentially is row level data that allows us to dig right down in, and hopefully the tool set that you've created or the way you've set up your reports allows you to go from your monitor page to your analyze page and make filter as we go, so that when you end up on the details page, you're already pre-filtered a whole lot of stuff. So instead of getting to this detail page and having thousands and thousands of lines, you want to get this point and you've actually drilled down to a specific set of data that you need to understand. So page hierarchy. So once you're on each individual page, you need to think about the hierarchy of the page and the data itself. So what I've got here is an example of a sort of how an individual might come in and utilize information on a page. So based on most of the us Westerners, we read a page. If we go and read a book, we'll read a page from the top left to the bottom right. And so we're bringing a lot of this psychology, I guess, over into how we look at dashboards. So what we're going to see is someone come in and they're just going to radiate to the top left. So what we want to do in the top left is give them complete context of what they are looking at on this page. So a good quality page title in the top left hand will allow them to start to understand what they're actually going to get from this page. The next thing, as they move down, so the logo is, if you know, I'm a big fan of having logos of your business. It allows people to feel at home, that what they've got in front of them is actually for them, and it's meaningful for their organization. If we think they're going to move top left to top right, then the next thing they're going to do is they're going to drop down in here. And so the next thing they see should be our most important KPI. And these arrows are really about context and about data hierarchy. So our most important KPI should be here, and our least important KPI should be over here. And there could be a range of contextual bits of information that flow across these KPIs, which we'll have a look at in a little minute. Filters on the left-hand side, bit of a personal preference. Others prefer it on the right-hand side. I'm used to the left-hand side. I think a lot of the users I've seen have been good with left-hand side because we've seen it so much in web development. You know, people are used to having navigation on the left-hand side. And for me, people are moving away from, when they're reading the page, they're moving away from that left-hand side. So it doesn't take up a lot of prominent screen real estate, but it's a really good place for people to go to because they're used to going to the left to change navigation. Once we get in, we've got our most important chart here. And then obviously the flow from that point is to go across and down and across. Typically, we might see if you have a small table or table on a page, then it should be in the bottom right-hand corner, or at least along the bottom. If it's a table that's on with charts, then it should be down the bottom because people are going to go through the hierarchy of information, and a chart will always have a higher hierarchy because it's showing less detailed information than a table. So avoiding the pitfalls. I'm a big fan of avoiding the pitfalls, and we'll look at some of the do's in a second, but do not overdo colors. So color abuse is a pet hate of mine. Don't put colors in just because you can. Make sure that when you're putting in colors in, that they're meaningful. And again, I'll revisit the colors in a minute, or what to do. But in this case here, in this example that I'm showing you, we don't need to know each individual bar of that is different and represent it as a different color. It doesn't add any value to us because we know they're different segments because they're different bars. It just makes it more confusing when you've got other colors that are important on the screen. So don't use colors unless you really need to. Misuse of pie charts. There's a lot of contention out there around pie charts. I'm okay with pie charts, but I encourage people to use 2 or 3 segments. I saw someone last night say 4, but what you want to do is just make sure that you're minimizing the number of segments that you put into a pie chart, because it gets harder and harder for humans to actually understand what the difference is. So I would encourage people to use horizontal bar charts more. So you can see this pie chart here. We can pick the large segment. We can do that all right. The orange and yellow, we start to get a little bit iffy, but we can probably work it out if we think about it. And then if we get down to purple, blue, pink, green, we really can't disseminate that information very quickly. Now, if I go back and we look at this bar chart here, we can see the pink is large, brown, blue. But it gets really important that when we get out into these little ones, it's actually really easy for us to understand the size difference between those bars, much easier than in a pie chart. So I encourage you to use horizontal bar charts, and I'll explain a bit in a second too. And if you need to show part of whole, then I'd encourage you to use a tree map. The tree map is much better. Humans understand rectangles a lot better than they do wedges. My title didn't change, but what we're looking at here is basically avoid clutter. So too much information defeats purpose of clarity. So remove clutter and stick with a structure. So in this case here, we've got KPIs all over the place. We've got charts in the middle of nowhere. There's no page hierarchy. There's no information flow. We're not really telling a story. We're just bombarding with information. So just really consider how you lay out your page, and is it allowing someone to flow through the page to go from high level information to low level information, or at least follow a process of understanding the information. Don't know why my charts, my titles are not changing, but it's okay. So in this case here, just avoid visual clutter. So what we're doing here is we've got, in this example, we've got a background image. It's got a lot of lines going across the page. It's distracting from the real purpose of this data visualization, and that we're trying to get information across. We've got lines going through numbers. We've got lines running right next to this line chart. It doesn't help the end user to actually consume the information. Some people might think it looks pretty and all that sort of stuff, but the value in this is the information, not it looking pretty. And bad data. So nothing will ruin the consumption of a report better, more faster than bad data. So I've seen this often. You've gone into clients, and people have produced reports, sent it out there, and the end user like, oh, it's all wrong. You know, the data's all wrong. You know, I don't trust this report, I don't trust this tool, you know, and then it takes months and months to actually rebuild that faith and trust in the development of the report. So really focus, make sure that before you deploy, before you get anything out there, that you've checked and double checked your data is correct. So compare against the data source. So do something in Excel just to compare specific numbers and making sure that you've got those correct. So some final tips, some good things to do. So adding context to KPIs. Really important, because numbers are number, right? Now, sometimes just seeing a number doesn't actually mean anything unless it has context. So make sure you're giving context to your KPIs. Now, a good way to do that is through the use of a trend. So in this example, we've got two things that help give us context. We've got a trend line in the background, which gives us an understanding of what typically this number is doing over time. We've got the number itself, but then we've also got a goal number. So we can see that this is green, is a green tick. We've got the number that it's green against. We've got a whole lot of context to understand the value of this number. The other way to do it, if you're not using a KPI like this, is to add context through additional information. So I talked about the data hierarchy along the KPIs. So here we've got total revenue, we've got total units, then we've got current year sales, previous year sales, and percentage growth. So I've got a pretty good understanding of, you know, compared to our total revenue, what's our current year look like, what did our previous year look like, and yes, we're growing. So that's really cool. Also adding symbols from a minimal perspective helps us. The other thing around using symbols is obviously it helps people with color blindness or issues around the color side of things. So I talked about color abuse. So what we want to do is we want to use color only to highlight or as a secondary measure. So an example of highlighting you can see here. So so we can see here we've got the ability to see negative highlighting. So we've got red. You know, if everything else is sort of green or light blues or whatever the case may be, then what stands out in this case is the red. So I'm using color to purposely highlight issues. And so an end user could come in here and very quickly go, oh, rural as a category is declining, got to do something about that. But up in urban, regular and select are declining quite dramatically. So maybe we need to look at that more so, because it's a larger chunk of our business. So use colors carefully, but use them wisely. The other option there is using it as a secondary measure, really powerful here, that we can have a look at convenience as a revenue. We can see it's our largest segment in this case here, but we can also, with our secondary color of percentage growth, we can see that youth and all season are growing. Convenience is, you know, sort of midline, but productivity is obviously the lowest with regular on the percentage growth. So really powerful to be able to use colors as adding value rather than just confusing. The other thing is around segmentation. So in this case, there's a lot going on here, but what's quite cool is that because we've colored by category in this sense, we can actually look at the clusters of where we're at based on lower values. So in this case, we've got products and then we've got categories. And so we can cluster our information to see if there's something going on around a category, or but knowing that at a lower level we can we've got specific information. Horizontal bar chart. So I like to sort of give this, the use of horizontal bar charts for me is really important. So whenever you're dealing with something that's a named thing, so it could be anything from a product to a country to an employee, I encourage you to use a horizontal bar chart. It's faster to consume. It's much easier. In this case here, we're looking at the States of America. It's much easier to consume California and then look across Florida, et cetera, than it is here to read it horizontally and then go up vertically and try and consume that. The other thing too is if it's longer, we end up with those sort of diagonal or vertical, and then we have to turn our head and try and figure out what's going on. So this way is much easier to consume from a readability, but we also rank from top to bottom. We don't rank from left to right. So when we're ranking, you know, biggest to smallest, we're always ranking top to bottom. So just keep that in mind when you're using a bar chart with an item that's named. So that's me. We've got a couple of minutes left for Q&A. So if anyone wants to ask a question, please chuck it in the Q&A box in Zoom. I've got my details sitting up there. So if you want to jot those down, you know, if we're not connected on LinkedIn already, please connect. And if you want to drop me an email, there is my email address. So if you have any questions, please jump in and ask them. No questions. Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, that's a quick run at designing data visualizations. This will be recorded. So once we've processed the recording, I will put it back up on LinkedIn, no doubt. And if you want to have a rerun through it, if I went too quickly, then you know, just let me know and I'll share the link with you so that you can watch it again. Thanks, Gotham. Appreciate that that note. Good to catch up again. All right. Okay, cool. I don't see any questions coming in. So thanks a lot for that, guys. And like I said, just be in contact if you need to ask any questions. Cheers.